The news spread through hfysci-fi village faster than the morning fog rolling down the hills. Lin Yu was getting married. And not just to anyone, but to Shin Mo, the crippled man from the eastern estate. By noon, the entire village knew. By evening, the whispers had sharpened into cruel certainty. What a pity, the women muttered as they washed clothes by the river. Such a pretty girl. To end up with a man who can't even stand. She must have been desperate. Lin Yu heard none of it directly, but she felt it everywhere, behind every polite smile, inside every pause that lingered a second too long. She was 18, with eyes too gentle for the world she lived in. Life had hardened others in hfysci-fi, but Lin Yu had remained soft, like grass bending under weight rather than breaking. Her hands were rough from farm work, her clothes always clean but mended more times than she could count. She had never imagined marriage would come like this. Her father had been injured in a landslide the previous winter. The medical bills piled up faster than the snow had fallen. Her mother barely slept anymore. And when the Shin family's proposal arrived, cold, formal, and impossible to refuse, there was no real choice to be made. Shin Mo. A name spoken with unease. He had once been the pride of the county, brilliant, wealthy, admired. Until 3 years ago, when an accident left him confined to a wheelchair. Since then, he rarely appeared in public. Some said his temper had turned dark. Others whispered that half his soul had died with his legs. But the Shins were still rich. Rich enough to pay Lin Yu's father's debts in full. Rich enough to ensure her family would survive. That was the price. Her mother said softly that night, fingers trembling as she folded Lin Yu's clothes. If you don't want this, we can still. Lin Yu shook her head before the sentence could finish. It's fine, she said quietly. Her voice was steady. Too steady. She did not cry. She did not protest. She simply accepted the fate handed to her like a bowl of bitter medicine, something unpleasant, but necessary. Marriage, she told herself, was not always about love. Sometimes, it was about endurance. She first saw Shin Mo 3 days later. The Shin estate loomed at the edge of the village like a separate world, stone walls, iron gates, silence thick enough to press against the ears. A servant led Lin Yu through the courtyard, her heart pounding louder with every step. Then she saw him. Shin Mo sat beneath a pavilion, a thin blanket over his legs, hands resting calmly on the armrests of a black wooden wheelchair. He wore plain clothes, dark and unadorned, but nothing could hide the sharpness of his features. He was unexpectedly handsome. Not in a warm way. In a distant, almost dangerous way. His face was pale, his eyes deep and unreadable. When he looked up at her, Lin Yu felt as if she had stepped into cold water. So this is him, she thought. The crippled man. He steadied her without speaking, his gaze steady, assessing, not cruel, not kind. Simply detached. You are Lin Yu, he said at last. Yes. Her hands were clasped tightly in front of her. She lowered her eyes, as etiquette demanded. You know why you're here? Yes. Silence stretched between them. Most men would have said something then, some reassurance, some awkward kindness. Shin Mo did neither. Marrying me will not be easy, he said flatly. I have no interest in pretending to be a good husband. If you regret this later, don't expect sympathy. The words were sharp, but Lin Yu did not flinch. I don't regret it, she replied. That finally earned a reaction. His eyebrows twitched, almost imperceptibly. You don't even know me. I know enough. She raised her eyes then, just briefly. Long enough to meet his gaze. I know this marriage will save my family. And I know you didn't choose this any more than I did. For the first time, something shifted in Shin Mo's eyes. Surprise. Perhaps even irritation. You're not afraid of me? Lin Yu thought of the whispers. The pity. The fear people wrapped around him like a second skin. She shook her head. No. She did not add because you are the one who should be pitied, though the thought flickered and died in her chest. Pity was not love. And it was not what she intended to give him. Shinemo looked away, his jaw tightening. Then you're foolish, he said quietly. Maybe, Lin, you thought. But foolishness had kept her family alive so far. The engagement was announced the next day. The village reacted exactly as expected. Some shook their heads. Some smirked. Some sighed dramatically, as if Lin Yu's fate was their own tragedy. She's selling herself, one man said openly. Better than starving, another replied. Lin Yu walked past them with her back straight and her chin level. Every step felt heavy, but she did not slow. At night, alone on her narrow bed, doubt finally crept in. She imagined a lifetime of silence. Of distance. Of caring for a man who might never care for her in return. She pressed a hand to her chest, steadying her breath. I can do this. She had endured hunger. Cold. Loss. She could endure marriage. What she did not know, what no one in Qingshui village knew, was that this cruel match, born of sacrifice and scorn, was only the beginning. And that on the night she became Shinmo's wife, the truth would rise. Just as he would. From the wheelchair they all believed defined him. The wedding took place under a sky heavy with gray clouds, as if even the heavens were unsure whether to bless the union. Red silk was hung across the Shin estate gates, bright and celebratory, yet it felt almost mocking. The villagers arrived in clusters, curiosity outweighing courtesy. They whispered openly now, no longer bothering to lower their voices. Lin Yu sat inside the bridal sedan chair, hands folded in her lap, listening to it all. Such a waste. She'll be a widow in spirit before she's even a wife. At least her family won't starve anymore. The words slid into her ears like cold needles, but she kept her back straight. Her face, hidden beneath the red bridal veil, remained calm. If she cried today, she told herself, she would never stop. Inside the main hall, Shinemo waited. He was dressed in formal wedding robes, dark red trimmed with gold. The color should have made him look festive. Instead, it sharpened the contrast between his pale face and his shadowed eyes. He sat in his wheelchair at the center of the hall, spine straight, expression unreadable. When Lin Yu was guided to stand beside him, the murmurs grew louder. He can't even stand for the ceremony. What kind of marriage is this? The ritual was shortened, altered to accommodate him. No bows requiring movement. No walking side by side. Everything was adjusted, carefully, painfully obvious. Lin Yu felt it, how every change reminded everyone of his condition. When she bent slightly to pour tea, she noticed Shinmo's hands. Long fingers. Strong. Steady. Not the hands of a broken man. The thought startled her, and she quickly looked away. Husband and wife bow to heaven and earth, the officiant announced. They bowed. Husband and wife bow to each other. Lin Yu turned toward him. Through the thin veil, she could see his outline. He hesitated only a fraction of a second before inclining his head. That was all. No smile. No warmth. Thus, the marriage was sealed. Their bridal chamber was quiet. Too quiet. Red candles flickered on the table, wax slowly dripping like time itself stretching unbearably thin. The bed was neatly arranged, embroidered with symbols of prosperity and harmony that felt oddly ironic. Lin Yu sat on the edge of the bed, veil still covering her face, hands folded in her lap. Every sound outside, the distant laughter of servants, the clink of dishes, felt far away. Then the door opened. Shinemo entered, pushing his wheelchair forward himself. The servants withdrew quickly, closing the door behind them. Silence settled again. You can remove the veil, he said. His voice was calm. Detached. Lin Yu reached up and lifted it herself. The candlelight illuminated her face, soft features, nervous eyes, lips pressed together in quiet resolve. Shinemo studied her for a long moment. You don't look happy, he observed. Lin Yu considered the truth of that. I don't look unhappy either, she replied. That earned a faint, humorless curve of his lips. It vanished just as quickly. This room, he said, gesturing slightly, is yours. There is another bedroom down the hall. I'll be staying there. Her heart skipped. Oh, she said. Not disappointment. Relief. And something else she refused to name. This marriage is an arrangement, Shin Mo continued. There's no need to force intimacy. I won't touch you. You won't be expected to play the devoted wife. Lin Yu nodded slowly. Thank you. The words slipped out before she could stop them. He looked at her sharply. For what? For not making this harder than it already is. Something dark flickered in his eyes, perhaps shame, perhaps anger. You think living with me will be hard? She hesitated, choosing honesty over politeness. I think living with anyone you don't know is hard. That seemed to surprise him. He said nothing more, turning his wheelchair toward the door. As he reached it, Lin Yu spoke again. I'll prepare your meals myself, she said. And your clothes. If you need anything, you can tell me. You're not my servant, he replied coldly. I know, she said gently. I'm your wife. He paused. For a long second, his hand tightened on the wheel. Then he left. The days that followed settled into a strange rhythm. They ate separately. They spoke little. Yet Lin Yu began to notice things. She noticed how Shin Mo woke early, often already dressed when servants arrived. How he refused assistance, insisting on pushing his wheelchair himself. How his gaze followed the world around him with sharp awareness, missing nothing. She noticed the tension in his shoulders whenever guests visited. And she noticed something else. No matter how cold he was with words, he never treated her with cruelty. When she brought him tea, he thanked her. Briefly. When she adjusted the blanket over his legs one evening without thinking, he stiffened, but did not pull away. One rainy afternoon, she found him in the study, struggling to reach a book on the highest shelf. Without a word, Lin Yu stepped forward and took it down for him. Their fingers brushed. The contact was brief, accidental. Yet it felt loud. Thank you, he said quietly. She smiled before she could stop herself. He saw it. And looked away. That night, Lin Yu lay awake listening to the rain. This was not love. She knew that. But it was not hatred either. It was something suspended between distance and familiarity, a fragile balance neither of them knew how to name. She turned onto her side, staring into the darkness. I can live like this, she thought. She did not yet realize that cracks had already begun to form. Not in the marriage, but in the walls Shin Mo had built around himself. And cracks, once started, had a way of spreading. The first time Lin Yu noticed something was wrong, it was entirely by accident. It was early morning, the kind where mist clung to the ground and the world felt half asleep. She carried a basin of warm water through the corridor toward Shin Mo's room, careful to keep her steps light. Though he rarely asked for help, she had learned his habits. He disliked being disturbed, but he never refused quiet consideration. The door was slightly open. She paused, intending to announce herself. Then she froze. Shin Mo was not in his wheelchair. He stood beside the bed, one hand braced against the table, his back to the door. His legs were bare from the knee down, muscles taut, trembling as though holding back something immense. For a heartbeat, Lin Yu thought she was imagining it. Her breath caught. The basin in her hands tilted slightly, water rippling to the edge. Then his knee buckled. Shin Mo cursed under his breath and lowered himself sharply back onto the bed, reaching for the wheelchair beside him. The movement was fast, practiced, too practiced. The sound of the water sloshing betrayed her. He turned. Their eyes met. The silence that followed was suffocating. How long, Shin Mo asked quietly, have you been standing there? Lin Yu's mind was spinning. 1,000 thoughts collided at once, shock, confusion, disbelief, but her voice came out steady. Not long. A lie. But a small one. His gaze hardened, sharp as a blade. You saw. She nodded. He looked away, jaw clenched, his hand gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. So, he said flatly, now you know. Lin Yu stepped inside and gently set the basin down. Her heart pounded, but she forced herself not to rush him with questions. Instead, she did what felt most natural. She knelt in front of him. The movement startled him. You don't have to explain right now, she said softly. Only, don't hurt yourself. For a moment, Shin-Mo stared at her as if she were something dangerous and unfamiliar. Then he laughed. It was low. Bitter. You're not even going to ask why I lied. I think, Lin Yu said after a pause, that if you wanted me to know, you would have told me. The laughter died. Something unreadable crossed his face. You're strange, he murmured. So people say. After that morning, nothing was the same. And yet, everything was. Shin-Mo did not forbid her from entering his room anymore. He did not explain himself either. But the air between them shifted, thicker, heavier, charged with things unsaid. Lin Yu began to notice more. She noticed how he never let servants into his room alone. How his wheelchair was always positioned within arm's reach of the bed. How, late at night, she sometimes heard the faint sound of movement, controlled, strained breathing, as if someone were fighting a silent battle. One evening, she brought him dinner and found him staring out the window, rain streaking the glass. Does it still hurt? She asked before she could stop herself. He didn't turn. What? Your legs. The pause was long. Sometimes, he admitted. Not a lie. But not the truth either. Lin Yu placed the tray down and sat across from him. You don't have to pretend with me, she said quietly. I already married you. Whatever your secret is. I'm here. He closed his eyes. The rain outside grew heavier. You think this is a blessing? He said at last. To stand, but not walk? To be strong enough to rise, but weak enough to fall? She said nothing. 3 years ago, Shin-Mo had not been crippled. The accident had come suddenly, too suddenly. A carriage crash on a mountain road. Or so the story went. But the truth was messier. There had been betrayal. A cousin hungry for power. A carefully planned fall that had not killed him, only broken him enough to remove him from the board. His legs had been injured, yes, but not beyond recovery. Recovery, however, required time. And enemies did not wait. So Shin-Mo had chosen the wheelchair. A shield. A lie that made him invisible. Everyone stops seeing you when you stop standing, he said, voice hollow. They think you're harmless. Weak. Lin Yu listened, her chest aching. And you let them, she said. I needed to survive. The admission hung between them. What about now? She asked. His gaze flicked to her. Now, he said slowly, I don't know. From that day on, Lin Yu became the keeper of his secret. She never looked surprised when she found him standing. Never flinched when his legs shook. She simply adjusted the room, moved furniture, closed doors, stood quietly nearby. Sometimes, she placed her hand out without a word. Sometimes, he took it. The first time he leaned on her for support, his weight was real, solid. Alive. She did not feel burdened. She felt trusted. You shouldn't, he said once, breath uneven. If anyone finds out. I won't tell, she said immediately. I don't mean that. He met her eyes. You shouldn't tie yourself to a man like me. I'm not safe. She smiled faintly. I didn't marry you for safety. That night, lying in her bed, Lin Yu stared at the ceiling, her heart in chaos. She had married a crippled man. But the man she was living with was not broken. He was wounded. Guarded. Dangerous in ways she did not yet understand. And she was falling in love with him. Not with the secret. Not with the strength hidden behind the wheelchair. But with the quiet, fierce will that refused to surrender. Shin Mo, alone in his room, stood beside the window long after the candles burned low. His legs trembled. His heart did not. For the first time since the accident, he wondered if the lie he had lived inside for 3 years might finally come to an end. And whether the woman sleeping down the hall would be the one to wake him from it. The night was quiet in a way that felt deliberate, as though the world itself were holding its breath. Red candles burned low in the bridal chamber, their flames trembling whenever the wind brushed past the paper windows. Outside, the Shin estate slept. Inside, Lin Yu sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded in her lap, her heart beating faster than she cared to admit. This was their wedding night in name only. They had already been married for weeks, yet tonight felt different, heavier, charged with something inevitable. The door opened softly. Shin Mo entered, pushing his wheelchair forward with slow, measured movements. He was dressed simply, his expression unreadable, but his eyes were darker than usual, shadows pooling beneath them. "You should rest," he said. "It's late." Lin Yu nodded, but she did not move. "So should you." He watched her for a long moment. "You know," he said quietly, "tonight is supposed to mean something." "Yes. But it doesn't have to," he added quickly. "Nothing needs to change." She stood. The movement was small, but it drew his full attention. "I know," she said. "But I don't want to pretend it's just another night." Silence stretched between them. Shin Mo looked away first. "There are things about me," he began, then stopped. His fingers curled tightly against the armrest. "Things you shouldn't be involved in." Lin Yu stepped closer. "I already am." Her voice was calm, but her heart felt like it might tear itself apart. He laughed softly, without humor. "You think you understand," he said. "But you don't know what it means to live half-hidden. To measure every step. To fear standing up more than falling." She reached him then, placing her hand over his. His skin was warm. "Then don't stand alone," she said. For a long moment, he did not breathe. Then, slowly, deliberately, Shin Mo moved his hands from the wheelchair to the edge of the bed. Lin Yu's breath caught. He pushed himself up. At first, it was only a shift of weight. A subtle change. Then, impossible, undeniable, his feet touched the floor. He stood. Not fully straight. Not without strain. But he stood. Lin Yu stared at him, the world narrowing to this single moment. Her mind screamed that this could not be real, that she was dreaming, that the candlelight was playing tricks on her. "Shin Mo," she whispered. His legs trembled. A sharp breath escaped him, but he did not sit back down. "I can't walk far," he said. "And I can't run." "Not yet." Tears welled in her eyes. You can stand." "Yes." The word sounded like a confession. "I have been able to for a long time." Her chest tightened, emotions colliding, shock, relief, anger, awe. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice breaking despite herself. "Because the moment people know," he said, "the moment they see me rise, I become a threat again." He took one unsteady step forward. Lin Yu moved without thinking, catching his arm. He froze. Their bodies were suddenly close, too close. She could feel the tension in him, the restrained strength, the heat of his skin. "You should be angry," he said quietly. "I lied to you." She swallowed hard. "Yes," she said honestly. "I am." His jaw tightened. "But I also know why you did it," she continued. "And I know you trusted me enough to show me." He closed his eyes. "I didn't plan to," he admitted. "But tonight, I couldn't keep pretending. Not with you." Her fingers tightened around his sleeve. "Then don't," she said. "Not with me." He looked at her then, really looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time. In one sudden motion, he pulled her into his arms. The embrace was fierce, desperate, nothing like the careful distance they had kept. Lin Yu gasped, her hands pressing against his chest, feeling his heartbeat racing beneath her palms. "You don't know what you're doing to me," he murmured into her hair. "Then tell me," she whispered. His lips found her forehead, her temple, her cheek, hesitant at first, then burning with restraint finally unleashed. When he kissed her, it was slow, trembling, as if he were afraid she might disappear. She kissed him back. The world outside ceased to exist. He lowered himself onto the bed with care, never letting go of her, as though afraid that if he did, the strength in his legs, and his resolve, might vanish. They lay together beneath the red canopy, breath mingling, hearts bare in a way neither had ever allowed before. This was not a night of reckless passion. It was a night of truth. Of walls falling. Of a man standing, not just on his legs, but in front of the woman who had chosen him when he appeared broken. As the candles burned down to stubs, Shin Mo held Lin Yu close, his voice low and solemn. "One day," he said, "I will stand before the world again." She rested her head against his chest, listening to his steady heartbeat. "When that day comes," she said softly, "I'll be right beside you." In the quiet darkness, surrounded by fading candlelight and unspoken promises, Shin Mo knew one thing with absolute certainty. The wheelchair had hidden him from his enemies. But this woman, this village girl who had married a crippled man, had given him the courage to rise. Morning light filtered gently through the paper windows, soft and pale, as if afraid to disturb what had been born in the night. Lin Yu woke first. For a moment, she lay still, listening. Not to silence, but to breathing. Slow, steady, warm against her shoulder. Shin Mo slept beside her, one arm loosely wrapped around her waist. His face, usually guarded and distant, was relaxed in sleep, the sharp edges softened. Without the wheelchair between them, without secrets pressing down, he looked younger. Lighter. Real. Lin Yu's heart swelled with something that felt dangerously close to happiness. She shifted slightly, careful not to wake him, and her gaze drifted to the wheelchair standing by the bed. It looked smaller now. Less powerful. No longer the thing that defined him. Shin Mo stirred. "You're staring," he murmured, eyes still closed. She smiled. "I was thinking. That's dangerous." She laughed softly, then grew serious. "Do you regret telling me?" His eyes opened. He studied her face for a long moment before answering. "No," he said. "I regret not telling you sooner." She reached up, brushing her fingers lightly against his cheek. He caught her hand, pressing it against his chest. "My enemies are still out there," he said quietly. "The moment I stand in public, everything changes. I won't be able to protect you from the consequences." Lin Yu met his gaze without hesitation. "I didn't marry you to be protected," she said. "I married you to share your life. All of it." Something in his eyes shifted, pride, tenderness, and a fierce, unmistakable love. The change did not happen all at once. Shin Mo did not throw away the wheelchair that morning. He still used it when servants were near. He still moved carefully, thoughtfully. But inside the estate, behind closed doors, he began to stand more often. He practiced walking, slow steps at first, his jaw clenched, sweat beading at his temples. Lin Yu stayed close, sometimes offering her arm, sometimes just watching quietly, her presence steady and reassuring. Each step was a battle. Each step was a victory. "You don't have to push yourself so hard," she said one afternoon, worry clouding her eyes as he staggered slightly. He steadied himself, breathing hard. "I do," he replied. "Because when I walk out there again, I won't do it halfway." The village noticed changes, even if they did not yet understand them. Shin Mo appeared more often now, his posture straighter, his gaze sharper. Rumors began to shift. "He looks different lately. Less broken." "Strange, isn't it?" Lin Yu walked beside him through the estate grounds, no longer bowed under invisible weight. Servants who once pitied her now watched with curiosity. Respect. Then came the day he chose. It was market day in Qingshui village. The streets were crowded, noisy, alive. Shinemo stopped at the estate gate, the wheelchair positioned behind him. Lin Yu felt the tension in his arm as he stood. "Are you ready?" she asked softly. He looked at the village beyond the gate, the place that had dismissed him, mocked him, erased him. Then he looked at her. "I am," he said. And he walked. Step by step, he crossed the threshold. The noise of the market faded into stunned silence. Eyes widened. Mouths fell open. "Is that Shinemo?" "He's walking." Whispers exploded like wildfire. Lin Yu walked beside him, her hand tucked into the crook of his arm, her chin lifted. She felt no fear. Only pride. The same people who had pitied her now stared in disbelief. The same voices that had mocked her choice fell silent. Later that day, the truth followed. The cousin. The betrayal. The accident that had not been an accident at all. Power shifted. Those who had once circled like vultures now bowed their heads. Shinemo stood before them, not as a crippled man, not as a rumor, but as himself. And Lin Yu stood with him. That evening, they returned home together. The wheelchair stood unused in the corner. Shinemo took Lin Yu's hands, his expression solemn, his voice steady. "You married me when I was at my lowest," he said. "When the world believed I would never stand again." She squeezed his hands gently. "You were never broken," she said. "You were just waiting." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "Everything I am," he said, "everything I'll become. I want you beside me." She rested her head against his chest, listening to the strong, steady rhythm of his heart. "I'm not going anywhere," she replied. Outside, the village of Qingshui buzzed with a new story, one of shock, regret, and awe. But inside the Shin estate, there was only quiet laughter, shared warmth, and the simple, powerful truth that love had done what cruelty never could. It had not only helped a man rise from a wheelchair. It had helped two souls stand tall together.